sound for you over there. Can you hear me? I've already got one clip on. Let's do a sound check for the people in the back. Can the back row hear me if I'm talking about like this, or do I need a microphone? Okay, cool. I got a thumbs up.
Try it again.
I got a thumbs up.
Okay, good enough.
If you can't hear me, holler.
Could be a little louder.
Could be a little louder. You want me to put the microphone on? Do you want me to put the microphone on?
Yes. Yes.
Yes.
Okay.
We need a microphone.
Yes, they got a yes for the microphone. More tech support.
Okay. Yeah. Got one on each side.
Whatever, yes.
Yeah.
Like that. There it starts. It's all your fault, Joe.
Testing. 1, 2, 3. Testing. Doesn't seem to be doing anything, does it?
I can turn it up a little longer.
Can you guys hear? Testing. 1, 2. Okay. All this technology. What am I supposed to do with this? Yeah. How about this? Okay. All right. I can move. You need the microphone?
Somebody once labeled Carol Burnett. It was not a compliment. It does affect. So, hi. Server perfect.
Yeah. We need another room. Sure. Well, it's actually 1 minute to 12.
Oh, then my
Well, yeah.
So, I've already sent out the email to the majors list. And for those who don't, so you think of field school.
If you tell them that the work in the field is the lost town.
No, that's no
Oh.
problem. That we can use.
I see,
but
I see.
It's the issue about the field schools in Europe.
Oh, no. What he wants is smart people that are work hard, you know. That's all you really need.
Well, I don't have a sense of alignment.
Yeah, yeah. He's got a short fuse, you know. He'll fire you in a heartbeat.
I mean, because that's the, I don't.
He's a businessman.
Welcome, everybody, to the first event of Ancient Studies Week. Before I introduce our speaker, I'd like to remind you what no doubt every single one of your professors has said repeatedly. The Ancient Studies Week events that are coming up. On Wednesday at this time in FA 450, come here our student excavators who receive scholarships, talk about excavating in Italy, Israel, and Greece. So at least one of them is here, so please join us in that. That's noon on Wednesday. The same day at 4 o'clock, Dr. Jennifer Niles will be speaking on the Parthenon frieze and Periclean policies, and you're all welcome to that. There will be a reception afterwards, and that's in the library gallery. Wednesday, 4 p.m. in the library gallery. I do, if at all possible, I recommend getting there a little early because usually we have so many people in the lecture that the people who come late get the worst seats in the back. And if you haven't yet made the decision to go to see the Heroes exhibit and get a guided tour at the Walters Art Gallery, we do have some places left on our bus trip cultures this Friday. If you want to go along with us, you have to pay $5, and you can go up to the department office, FA 452, and put your money down and join us on this trip. We'd love to have you come along with us. Just to let you know the time frame, we'll be leaving at around noon and returning at about 3:30. That's this Friday. Now I get to have the pleasure of introducing Al Luckenbach. Some of you here have worked under his tutelage. The Lost Towns Project has mentored innumerable ancient studies majors and majors from other departments as well. It's a wonderful, wonderful excavation in Arundel County. It provides a whole array of experiences that take place in an excavation. Not only digging, but artifact processing, education, all sorts of other features. It's a wonderful place to go to. Ancient Studies majors, if you haven't thought about it yet, obviously, you can come and see me, and we can talk about it. Al has been working as the county archaeologist for Anne Arundel County since 1988. He is in the Department of Planning and Zoning, which is an interesting niche for you to occupy, but it seems to work out very well. I thought you might be interested in knowing that a person who is directing excavations of time spans cultures from, what's the earliest culture that you've been working on?
Well, we're currently on a site that's going to 500 BC and counting, so it depends on how deep it is.
All the way to Colonial, 19th century?
Oh, I try to avoid that stuff.
Well, we all love old stuff in this area. But I thought you might be interested, particularly those of you who are ancient studies majors, to hear that Dr. Luckenbach's master's thesis was on Aztec languages. His dissertation for his PhD was on Greek coin hoards in the Mediterranean. So field archaeology and a love of the Mediterranean. Local field archaeology, you can put the two of them together and have a wonderful career. I'm not going to take any more time. Al, Al Luckenbach, director of the Lost Towns Project.
Well, thank you. Yeah, kill the lights to some degree. Yeah. Well, as you've heard, I'm the county archaeologist from Anne Arundel County. And as with many employment opportunities these days, I do cultural resource protection for a government. And planning and zoning is a logical place, actually, because that's the people that review all the proposed developments. And essentially that's why I was hired, to check on whether the new subdivision or the new supermarket is going to destroy archaeological resources. And in a sense, planning and zoning would have been perfectly happy for me to sit at a desk and watch the project come in on one side and write something and let it go out the other side. But I'm not really that kind of archaeologist. I wouldn't have survived very long doing that. So I set about creating something more than just a compliance review. And it's taken the support of the local citizenry, especially the support of local politicians. But we eventually built something we call the Lost Towns Project. It's a very public-oriented project. We use a lot of volunteers. We use them in the lab. We use them in the field. We use them in the archives. We've got an education program going at London Town, which you'll hear about soon, where we have usually 50, 60, 70 fourth graders show up every Wednesday to experience archaeology. And we're kind of proud of the fact that they have such things at St. Mary's City or Colonial Williamsburg or even Annapolis, where they have a dig day for children. Well, they have a fake dig. We stick them out there on the screens and they get real buckets of dirt as it's coming out of the ground. So we're kind of proud of the fact that we just put them to work. We call it the Lost Towns Project. And I don't know whether you can see in this room that little map on the lower right. Because one of the things that quickly developed was that there were a number of 17th century towns in the county that had disappeared, no longer on the map, no longer on the landscape. And we started back in 1990 where we discovered the first of these, Providence. And since then, we've worked at two other lost towns, three actually now. It's not on the map here yet. And that's where the term comes from, lost towns. But as you'll see towards the end of the talk, we've recently took a sharp veer into the prehistoric and have spent a lot of the last year digging at a fabulous site in the southern part of the county. I've got a talk here that was essentially prepared 6 months ago for some kind of 20-year retrospective, as I've been with the county over 20 years now. But it does nicely to walk you through all the different types of sites that we've dug with the Lost Towns Project. And as Dr. Goldberg mentioned, a lot of our help through the years has been students from UMBC who have come out in the summertime and for some kind of pittance and gas money, been willing to work for weeks for me. I will proceed to walk through a large number of sites here. If there's something that you want to know about, I'm the kind of person you can raise your hand and holler at me, because I'm basically doing a stream of consciousness here anyway. Providence was founded in 1649 on the Severn River. It's essentially the precursor of Annapolis. The center part of the occupation moved from the north bank of the river to the south bank of the river, but Providence is definitely the precursor of Annapolis. You hear a lot about St. Mary's City, if you study Maryland history at least, but you don't hear much about Providence. But Providence is what trumped and finished off St. Mary's City. St. Mary's City was a dying place in the 1640s. It was on the losing side of the English Civil Wars. And when 300 Virginians showed up to settle in Providence in 1649, that more than doubled the population, the European population of Maryland. So you can see why 50 years later the capital would move to Annapolis, that the population center had shifted. As with many of these sites, the first site we found from this was on a proposed subdivision. These, what used to be wonderful agricultural fields, are now totally paved over with houses. And one of the things we discovered, as you'll see more and more, this is a cove that's now silted in. 350 years of farming causes a lot of silt to go down into the water. And things that used to be navigable waterways are today marshes or even dry land. And what we found over and over is that these sites are up at the head of the cove where they can get fresh water and water access. The Broadneck site, we barely knew what we were doing. We found a couple of cellar features with a basic outline of a house. The cellars were full of brown clay tobacco pipes, which were made in Virginia in the 1640s. So we knew we had an early one. People back then had these earthen cellars under the floorboards of the houses, and God bless them, they seemed to use them as a trash depository and threw everything in there. The most spectacular find was at the very bottom of the cellar. Someone had broken a plate and obviously cared enough for it to stack it up, awaiting the invention of super glue, which we had. And it turned out to be a Delftware plate made in Portugal, and with the arms of what appears to be the arms of Edward Lloyd, who was the first commander of the Providence settlement. So even though no one's heard of Providence, it's a little like finding a plate with John Smith's family crest on it at Jamestown. Burleystown land was another of the Providence sites. Providence, in fact, is more like a hamlet than a town, if you know the term hamlet. A bunch of farmers living in close proximity to one another. Any one farmhouse could probably see 2 or 3 others in the distance. Not what we'd think of as a town, but they sure thought of it as a town because they had Town Point and Town Path and Town Creek and Town Lands. So I'm going along with it. As a matter of fact, this site was called Burleystown Land. Much of what we're doing in 17th century work is looking for the outlines of the buildings. And back then you didn't have a stone or brick foundation that you set your frame on. The main structural supports of the building, the main posts that held up the building, went straight into the ground. This isn't a great example since it's half excavated, but as you take off the plow zone and trowel down, you will begin to see the outlines of these posts. The hole that they dug to put the post in and the nice dark stain for the post. And then you end up playing connect the dots to figure out where the building is. This site was out here in this grove of trees, and these blue things, which have wiped out a fourth of the building there, are graves from the 18th century, the early 1700s. Interestingly, in the 1700s, the house site moved to the other end of the field. There was obviously this ruin there. It eventually became the cemetery. So that little knot of trees had never been plowed, which is a wonderful thing for an archaeology site. Burleystown land is where we first realized that Providence, being Puritans and quite different than the people in St. Mary's City, had connections to a different part of the old world, the Dutch. Some of you may remember that before the Plymouth plantation people arrived in Massachusetts, they went to Holland fleeing religious persecution because Holland was a Protestant country. Well, the people in Providence were Protestants, and lo and behold, a lot of their trade is with Holland. Now, it's not only getting material goods like cloth and so forth. These guys were using Dutch materials in what is otherwise a pretty standard 17th century English building. The Dutch Delft tile from around the fireplace. It had a pan-tile roof. It had green and yellow Dutch floor tiles in front of the hearth, and the back of the hearth had these Dutch yellow bricks. So we were impressed with that finding. The same sorts of materials showed up at our next site, a place called Town Neck. It was partially excavated by the United States Navy Seabees. And they had proceeded to do this huge hole in a Navy facility without any 106 compliance archaeology done beforehand. And they bisected this amazing cellar, cut it in half. And it was filled with 17th century goods. It had burned. There was actually a layer down there with charred wheat. It was astounding to see. But again, not only the Dutch tiles, English red bricks, but 3 different sizes of Dutch yellow bricks, and Dutch yellow bricks that had been altered by staining the end of them to create what must have been a pretty fantastic brick gable end of this building, but we have no way of knowing how fancy it must have once been. Another compliance project, a very rich individual wanted to build his McMansion on his newly acquired waterfront property, and he wanted to build it right here. And as you can see, this is something we see over and over again. Human beings always choose the same spot to put their house. We had no less than 4 structures we discovered before he built his McMansion. The earliest one dated to the 1650s, the very beginning of Providence. Wonderful strata there with wonderful collection of Delftware in it. And then the latest one was built in 1735 and burned about 1760 or thereabouts. Perhaps the most interesting one was this brick building here with a central fireplace. There's a well, and through the back end of the building, this trough comes from the well down into the gully. It's a laundry, and it's the first known example of a colonial laundry in the United States. Truthfully, it dates to about 1709. Levy Neck, again Providence. We've ended up with 8 Providence sites. This was a turf farm. Has interesting effects on an archaeological site. They plow it, they grow grass, they take the grass off, they take about 2 inches of soil with the grass. They plow it, they do it again the next year. So you can see this thing walking down. And we tested all around this spot, and you could find nothing because the plow zone that used to be there had been removed. What was left, though, was again one of these cellars under the floorboards. And we proceeded to quarter it and excavate it and found all these wonderful things, some of them going back to the 1660s. This is North Devon sgraffito pottery from England. But the real surprise came in the corner of the cellar here. Under all this trash, in a hole that was way too small for this individual, someone had taken a dead body and stuffed it in there. It's hard even to tell from this picture, but the knees are bent up and the head's bent up. No evidence of a coffin, no evidence of a shroud. What you've done is taken someone and stuffed them in the corner and then thrown a lot of trash over them. And we had Doug Owsley from the Smithsonian out. This was one of our claims to fame, was the media attention this thing got. This is a lady from the History Detectives. So we had an episode on the History Detectives, and we were all excited about that. Doug, who's the forensic anthropologist at the Smithsonian, pronounced that this guy had died of disease. And maybe notice, by the way, that they'd taken a broken milk pan and stuffed him in this hole that was too small. That's what the milk pan on his chest. It looks like a shield or something. But Doug said disease. Well, then he wanted this individual for his exhibit, which is still going on at the Smithsonian, called, what is it called? Written in Bone, Life and Death in the 17th Century. So they got him out and they started looking at him again, and they said, well, you know, now that we think about it, he does have a bunch of broken ribs, and his wrist is broken from a break that means he had his hand up when somebody smacked him this way. So we now think he was murdered. Well, and that's the way they're portraying it in the exhibit. And of course, that's what we always thought when we found the body stuffed in the corner of the basement. But anyway, the Smithsonian finally came around to our way of thinking. We also became famous on the Smithsonian's website. This is Al and some of the crew variously there. One of the things you learn about this, though, this guy was probably an indentured servant. He's about 15 years old. And one thing you really don't hear much about in your history, maybe you do here at UMBC, I'm not sure, is that how many people came over here as indentured servants. You signed up for like 7 years to work your life away for these people. And if you think about the economics of this, no one was going to hurt you if you killed one of these people and stuffed them in the basement. They'd just figure that the person deserved it. But the other thing to think about is indentured servants had a limited lifespan that they were going to work for you, 7 years. You worked them until they dropped, you know. You didn't want this person to be healthy after 7 years. You wanted every last ounce. And oddly enough, it is different than slavery, because slavery, as abhorrent as that is, you had an economic interest in keeping this person healthy. Not so with indentured servants. The Smithsonian exhibit recreated the grave, recreated the face, and then had a life-size example of the guy. Name unknown, but it is kind of eerie to see somebody that you dug up out of the ground come to life like that. Swan Cove, another Providence site, another series of large cellars under a couple of buildings. But the amazing thing here is it was a guy who listed in his inventory, Emmanuel Drew, one line in his inventory said he had the equipment for making tobacco pipes. Well, we found tons of stuff to indicate that this guy was making tobacco pipes. And it's a big deal in the Chesapeake because when they first realized that people were making pipes over here, and of course we're talking 17th century, every man, woman, and child smoked tobacco. You got these little grooves in your teeth from holding the pipe, and you find them on 10-year-old kids because they had a pipe in their mouth their whole life. Anyway, the news that people were making pipes in the Chesapeake has spawned 30 years of theory and counter theory. The first people to find them in Jamestown thought they were probably made by the Indians. And then later, Creoles have been brought into the play, but the famous one is the guy who got his PhD from saying that it was Africans who were doing this. But no one had ever found a kiln. No one had ever found who was making the fool things. And we found one, and of course he turned out to be a white Anglo-Saxon Protestant. These are parts of the kiln structure itself called a muffle. They're furniture that goes inside the kiln. These are some of his products. And the amazing thing is, to us, usually people thought of white pipes came from Europe and brown pipes came from the Chesapeake, and that was the whole universe of this thing. We not only found a tobacco pipe kiln, but we found a guy who thought he was an artist. And we figured out that he was getting in a boat and going 15, 20 miles upriver to get a hold of these raw clays, which occur on cliffs on the Severn River, pink and white ones, and green ones, and gray ones, and white ones. And he was coming back and he was doing swirls, and he was doing mixes, and he was trailing slips around these things. He wasn't doing this as cheaply as possible. He thought he was creating things. The scariest part of all for archaeologists in the Chesapeake would be these kind. They look exactly like an English pipe bowl, and they are made out of this white clay. And for the last 50 years, everybody to dig up one of these, myself included, would have said, that's English 100%, and it's made here. And the really phantasmagorical thing we found, some kind of presentation piece, we call it the crumb horn, crooked horn in Dutch. There's one other example in the world. It was found in Amsterdam, and it was done with white clay, and it was done with fleur-de-lis decoration on it. Ours is done with homemade decoration, but it's a perfect copy of it. This is cool. Burleystown Land, one of the sites I showed you early in our career. We found these things, these fragments of pipes, stems and bowls with these fancy decorations, and we were really excited about these Native American pipes. You know, we were really excited for years that we'd found these cool Native American pipes. Get over to Swan Cove, find this clay thing, which Emanuel Drew had carved, so that when you stick it in soft clay, you make this impression. And we've studied this. That isn't similar. That is the tool. And we're talking about a couple miles away, we find the tool that made the decoration on the pipe. Anyway, that's Providence. As I said, cove-oriented. Annapolis is right here, and Providence is right here, at least the sites that we've found. Obviously, much of archaeology is directed to where there's some place left to look. If there's a subdivision on it, you can't dig it. The next thing we got involved in was a county-owned park called Londontown on the South River. Very different than Providence in that this was a legislated town. It was laid out in a grid, 100 one-acre lots. It was the kind of lost town that archaeologists really like in that it took off for a while and then disappeared, essentially wiped out by the Revolutionary War. If you're a seaport, and this was a seaport, and trade is blocked by the British for 6 or 8 years, you're in trouble. And essentially, it killed Londontown. But anyway, there's this one brick mansion left that was the county poorhouse from 1824 to 1965. It's kind of amazing to think that we still had poorhouses in 1965. And then it became a county park. But for 20 years, they had a beautiful woodland garden in this house, and they called it Londontown House and Gardens. And they were kind of ignoring the fact that they had, like the last building in Williamsburg, and there's a whole town there, but they weren't looking for it. So we started looking for it. As I said, 100 one-acre lots on this peninsula in the South River. And this part, the upper quarter, is the county-owned park. Londontown is great because it's a county park. It's got a place to park, it's got public facilities, it's got restrooms, it's got places you can bring school children. So this is where the 60 or 70 fourth graders show up every Wednesday and literally learn how to do archaeology and do real archaeology. We don't throw artifacts in the bucket to make them happy. But a fourth grader, any piece of glass or bent nail works just fine. They think they found King Tut's tomb. The idea here, once again, is to follow these post hole patterns. This is a fence, this is a structure, for example, and this is another fence. Try to figure out where these buildings are. And since it's a county-owned park, we've convinced people that we ought to put the buildings back. So we totally excavate these sites, we remove all the contents of the post holes, and then one by one, we're slowly putting them back on the landscape. This, by the way, shows you a good example of what I was talking about with earth-fast architecture. The structural posts go straight into the ground. The wall is put up as a section, and you'll have 3 post holes down there. So if you've never been down there, it's an interesting place to visit. It's like St. Mary's City, only it's a lot closer. And This was our goodie bag, our treasure chest. Rumney's Tavern had one of these earthen cellars, and they had a change of ownership about 1724, and the new owner decided that he didn't need a cellar anymore. God bless him. He started throwing trash in there, and it wasn't the food prep end of the operation, it was the serving end of the operation. So every time they had a bad Saturday night at Rumney's Tavern, we'd get a layer of trash that had astounding things in it. Wine bottles with the shapes changed through time, and you can date this to the 1720s just by looking at that. Some of the earliest English white salt glazed stoneware with secure dating in the world. The book recently came out on this stuff and used Rumney's big time. An astounding Delftware collection, including 3 of these plates with a rather homely looking mermaid on them. Kind of appropriate for a seaport. Many Brits have actually made pilgrimages over here to look at this stuff, and they all seem to think that Rumney's Tavern was probably the sign of the mermaid, which is a real common tavern name in a seaport. It's now the logo for the London Town Foundation, which runs the park. Here's the second one going up, the carpenter's shop. Here it is outlined in the grass. We had posts at various points. Here it is, partially erect, and the thing's nearly done now. Just like happened once before, we're removing, before we can put a building onto these spots, we have to clear the site of everything of archaeological interest. So we dig every little feature. And there was this one dark stain in the corner, but not nearly in the corner, that we thought was a post hole, and we'd been digging at London Town for years and years and never found anything like this before. What this turned out to be was a grave for a child 3 to 5 years old. I don't have a good map of how this worked, but this was a nice, well-made coffin. Nothing's left here, by the way. What you see is a stain for the coffin and a stain for the bones. The one thing that survived was the enamel from the teeth by which you could age the individual. But after studying where it was, and you can't quite do this here, but it's inside there, and you look at the floor plan of this building and you realize that the floor joists have to run this way, and that this kid was put down between the floor joists under the floor of the structure. Now, never heard of that. Not a real English thing to do. Called up a whole variety of people, asked them about such things. Everybody said no, until one woman who actually worked for Goodwin and Associates said, well, I used to dig 17th century colonial sites in South Africa, and in the slave quarters, we'd find kids under the floorboards every time. She said, you should look at the Caribbean. So I start looking at the historical records for the Caribbean, which did a lot of trade with London Town, and find out that this burial practice, which originated in the west coast of Africa, was transported with the slaves to the Caribbean, and it was really common in the Caribbean to have the children under the floorboards. In fact, there was this one great document where the plantation owner, or sugar cane, whatever he was doing down there, writes in his journal that our slave quarters are falling down. They're vermin infested. They stink. We built brand new slave quarters. They won't move in because they won't leave the children who are under the floorboards. So we go, aha. Well, the guy that built this structure, Stephen West, had 6 slaves who worked in a tavern, all females, bing, 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 bing. So we just assume, and as a matter of fact, we know of slaves coming from Barbados to London Town, whole shiploads of them. So it's a pretty short step to assume that this is a female who came from Africa to Barbados, from Barbados to London Town, and was carrying on this African tradition despite all the cultural shocks she must have gone through. Another funny story, down here away outside of any building, this is Rumney's Tavern, this is the carpenter's shop, but over here in the corner of this excavation, we got another one of these stains, features we call them. under the plow zone. We started taking this thing down, and it's a little hard to tell, but if you saw a bigger example of that, what it is 6 headless articulated chickens. If you ate the chicken, it wouldn't still be articulated. So we had lots of jokes about foul play and mass murder and so forth. But okay, headless chickens. That started us off on, you know, everything we could find out about. Obviously, we started looking at African religions like hoodoo and so forth. Voodoo. Where did Leone get the term hoodoo anyway? Now I'm saying it. Anyway, part of the problem, we find lots of religions that would sacrifice chickens, real common, no problem. Except in all of these religions, people had enough common sense that after they sacrificed the chicken, they ate the chicken. They didn't bury the chicken in a hole. And what we have here is 6 chickens in a hole. Flat bottom, by the way, not just a hole. You know, if you had diseased chickens, you'd dig a hole and have a round bottom, you dump them in there. Flat bottom, 6 chickens arranged. But we've got no explanation, truthfully, of what that is. And that's one of the things about archaeology. You get to make up stories, but you're not always sure you're right. The last lost town, Harrington, is in the southernmost part of the county. Baltimore here, Annapolis here, and then Arundel, Calvert. So it's right down there. We got a grant from the state to look for another lost town. We went out in the field, which, you know, how hard could this be? This road here is called Town Road, and down here in the distance is Town Point. I mean, this is like falling off a log, right? Just hand us the money. Well, we started digging what are called shovel test pits, a common survey technique for archaeology where you dig a hole about this big around till you get to sterile soil, and you dig them every 50 feet until you find what you're looking for. Well, we had gone some 750 shovel test pits without finding anything that had anything to do with the town of Harrington. We started down at the end of the peninsula there, and we had worked our way up finally to this fancy high-end horse farm with $1 million racehorses, who we kept thinking were going to step in one of these holes and we were going to get sued. But we finally, at great depth, again, a lot of erosion going on here, started finding features, started finding the outlines of post holes, started finding ceramics of the right type that told us we were in the mid-17th century. So we looked at where we were finding this, where we found this stuff, and these little black boxes are Al's primitive attempt at showing you where the house sites were, not how big they were or what they would have looked like. But you see what was going on here is that they were on both sides of the road going down to Town Point. And I've often said, if you've been following along here, that there's a real PhD dissertation waiting there for someone to look at these 3 towns. Because Providence was a hamlet. It had one meeting house and a bunch of farms congregated in a haphazard fashion around, oriented to coves. London town was like the Romans. Boom, you drop a grid of 100 acres on top and you make 1-acre lots and all the streets are straight. And Harrington turns out to be more like a transportation town, where the town settled along the route as opposed to being oriented to the water or any man-made grid. One of the interesting outcomes of Harrington is we started working in the suburbs of Harrington. We found this map. It's a huge map, but this is a tiny, tiny little inset in a huge map. And it shows you how to get into Herring Bay. It's a navigation chart with depths, and it shows these sandbars in here that you didn't want to, you know, beach your boat on. So it says you go down here until you can line up this house, and then you come in there until you can line up the great tree with this house and this house. Of course, there's no great tree anymore, but we got the general idea that they were telling us exactly where Samuel Chew Sr. and Samuel Chew Jr. and this unknown person had built houses by 1710. Well, we were interested because Samuel Chew Sr. was one of the richest guys in the Chesapeake, and albeit a tiny, tiny thing, we had a map that showed where his house ought to be. And it's a little like the Harrington story in that, you know, you think this would be easy. Well, you don't have the great tree, and you don't know really the distance here. All you know is that you could see it, you know. So months went by until I got a phone call one day from the crew that said, yeah, we found it. The startling thing here, and that isn't Sam Chen, it's actually Sam Chu. Jokes about Chinese merchants, but that's a wine bottle seal. Rich people would have these green wine bottles and would put their names or initials in a inset on the side of them. So although they did trade them with their neighbors, if you find a bunch that say Samuel Chu, you know that you are where you think you are. The astounding thing here is the size of this thing. It's remarkably preserved. It burned in 1772. It's, to us, you know, we're used to these little stains in the ground from the earth-fast buildings, the posts in the ground. This thing to us is like Pompeii or something. This wall's 5 feet above that floor. There's the stone floor, it's still intact. There's the fallen chimney. We're not used to this kind of stuff. Wonderful Delft tiles, wonderful porcelain, obviously real high-end stuff. But as I said, the real deal here is size. This again is Al's crude attempt to show you the Chu house. This is the little thing on the map. It was built between 1690 and 1718, and its dimensions are 66 by 56. And if you've ever been down to Williamsburg, next time you go to the governor's palace, walk up there and say, isn't this kind of small? Because what we found, it's the largest home in the Chesapeake by leagues. It was an amazing thing. We're still working on this place, but it's truthfully hell on wheels to get through about this much brick rubble to get down to the floor. It's hard work, but that's why God made summer interns. This is a 1670 map of Anne Arundel County, and this is a map that shows you development activity. I don't really know what period it is. I'd say it's probably 5-year period or something like that. But you see the challenge that I have to meet every day at planning and zoning. So obviously things are turning up from all time periods in all parts of the county, even though I've only been telling you about 3 17th century towns. And so we've been at a number of other sites that have turned up this way. There's currently a brand new house here. Again, end of a cove, boom. They want to put their new house there. Everyone had known that there was a brickyard at this spot because there's a real fancy colonial mansion at the end of the road called Whitehall. Everyone said, okay, Whitehall Brickyard is here, and now someone wants to build on it. So we started excavating and started finding these brick clamps, which are fascinating things, and they're real cool when you get them exposed, but artifact-wise, it's just bricks, you know. No glass, no pottery, no nothing. But what was startling, we had Mr. Brickmaker from Colonial Williamsburg come up, getting his PhD on brick manufacturers in the 18th century. And we asked him, okay, Whitehall, brick clamp. How many brick clamps do you need to build Whitehall? He goes, 1, 2. Well, at that point, we had 20. It's at the head of this cove, and if you come out of this cove and go around the river and up the next river, you're at Annapolis. So what we eventually figured out was that this place was making all the bricks for the golden age of Annapolis, and no one even knew it, but they know it now. And the person actually moved their house a little bit, so they didn't really destroy much. Wilson site, same exact story. This is the exact spot where someone wanted to build their new house on top of this hill. And this is the brick foundation from a 1720 structure. This is a bed warming pan, you know, one of those things you put coals in, stick it in the bed. Fascinating, stellar decoration. Neat site. Cheney's Hills, again a subdivision, again an earth-fast building. But look at what we ended up outlining here. This is 16 feet wide. It's 95 feet long. That's the longest one of these things anybody's ever seen. Hearth here, hearth down here. And in fact, Edward Cheney was the ancestor of our recent vice president. Edward Cheney in 1650, interestingly, was a royalist because we found this head of Charles II, you know, which you wouldn't have if you were one of these Puritans from Providence. Anyway, interesting story here. There are a lot of Cheneys still in Anne Arundel County, and there are a lot of Cheneys in Calvert County. And as we have with a lot of these sites, we've gotten people from the computer science department to build us reconstructions that you can walk through and the fire going in the fireplace. We've done it for Rumney's Tavern. We've done it for about 6 places now, but we did it for Cheney's Hills. And as part of the film, I was interviewing local Cheneys. And I said, a lot of Cheneys in Anne Arundel. And the guy goes, yeah. And I said, Calvert too. And he says, we don't have anything to do with them. I finally figured out what was going on. Edward Cheney, Richard Cheney, the 1650s Cheney. Richard? Yeah, Richard. Had 2 wives. First one died, had kids with both. When he died in 1680, they immediately got tooth and claw into a fight over his property. The Calvert County Cheneys lost, went to Calvert County, and have not spoken to the Anne Arundel County Cheneys since 1680, even though they know they're both descendants from the same guy. Java is on the Smithsonian on the Chesapeake Bay. They've got an environmental research area there. We went to excavate at this 1747 brick ruin, and as is totally typical for the Lost Towns project, we immediately figured out that there was in the lawn there a 1670s structure with this enormous brick fireplace. There's Jane to give you a little scale. So we started ignoring the 1747 thing and went to the 1670 thing. But, okay. Also, obviously, prehistoric sites. Man has been in Anne Arundel County for 13,000 years, and this is one of those 13,000-year-old styles of spear point. The styles of spear points change through time, just like wine bottles and thank God, many other things, how we date things. Another site is now under a supermarket, but these are the outlines of stone hearths. This is the style of projectile point that was found with them. It's a 10,000-year-old Kirk site. That's called a Kirk point. The Adena site on the West River. This is remarkable. There was a site up here on the bluff that someone dug in the 50s. We finally, no one had permission to go back for the next, 40 years, but we finally got permission to go back. And in fact, the site was gone. They dug up what was left. The rest of it had gone down the cliff, gone. But what's amazing about it, and to look at the scale, those spear points are this big, and they are that thin. And they're made out of Ohio flint. And this is made out of Indiana pipestone, and this is made out of Ohio slate, and there's copper from Michigan, and there's hematite from New York. It's an Adena site which would be not out of place in Kentucky and Ohio, but is way out of place on the Chesapeake Bay. So it's one of our most famous sites. And then where we're working now, and since April, is a place called Pig Point. It's remarkable. My roots were prehistoric archaeology, but I just spent 20 years doing historic archaeology, and now I'm back into prehistoric, and yet how oddly similar they are, because what we're doing here is finding the remains of posts, figuring out what the outline is, and trying to figure out where these oval wigwam structures are. Tough to do in the environment. You're seeing several layers overlaid each other. But anyway, we're looking at post outlines to figure out floor plans, just like we are with the colonists. No one had ever found house patterns on the coastal plain of Maryland before. We've got bunches of them now. This map was drawn a long time ago. And no one had found them this old. The oldest ones in Maryland were from the 15th century. We got carbon-14 dates here of 1290, and then we dug deeper and the houses kept going, and we got carbon-14 dates of 520. And we kept going deeper, and the post holes keep showing up, and we're now probably at least at 500 BC. So this place is a really remarkable site. And wonderful preservation. Most Indian sites won't give you this kind of bone tools because the bone dissolves in acidic soils. There's a needle and awls and a little antler arrowhead. But I never thought that I'd find a whole Indian pot, but I never counted on size. One of the first things we found was this little paint cup. It was arranged in a hearth, and you could see the outlines of other ones. They were making these things. They were burning them in the hearth, firing them in there, and they pulled them out, except this one they left behind. It was sitting there in place, upside down. So we thought that was way cool. Then we found this little decorated Native American vessel that has the usual rings around the rim, has some triangles with sawtooth. That's pretty cool, but it's not unheard of. What's unheard of is this guy decorates rim to base. That's the most decorated Native American thing you'll ever see, at least around these parts. Southwest will top us, obviously. That, believe it or not, my theory is that that's a head of a woodpecker suspended upside down. We won't get into why, but there's good reasons to think that. And then just 2 weeks ago, one of the guys comes back from the screen going, "What's this?" It's the tiniest little pot you've ever seen in your life, and it's carefully decorated. We're just about done here, truthfully. Don't know what it's for. Could be a toy, could be for poison, could be for hallucinogenic drugs, but an amazing find. And that's the conclusion of the talk. I know some of you need to be somewhere, so sorry I ran over a little bit.
There's probably a class in this room right now, but
Is
if
there?
you have any questions, we can go out into the hallway. So please, thank Al again for this talk.
A little long.
Well, you're not going to